Chag Sameach and Gut Yontif. Welcome to the Jewish Diasporist, a podcast exploring the political, social, and cultural implications of life in diaspora. We are your hosts, Ben Yenowitz
and Zach Smerin. For this episode, we spoke with two activists and organizers based in Palestine-Israel. Kastuś was previously involved in Kompass Media, the Russian-language media collective which we interviewed last year for episode 26. Since part of my family originally hails from what is now Belarus, I was naturally very interested in his journey from growing up in Minsk, through Australia, and now residing in Tel Aviv.
Our other guest is Mohammed, a 48 Palestinian from al-Fahm, who's been active doing work in the West Bank, as well as within his hometown and the wider Palestinian community within the ceasefire borders of 48.
There are obviously significant challenges to Israeli-Palestinian cooperation on the ground. Many Palestinian groups fear normalizing the status quo by engaging with Israeli groups without specific preconditions, although these can vary in interpretation. There are also logistical matters. Palestinians obviously have a much harder time traveling across the land. What everyone should recognize, hopefully, is the value of such organizing in forging a new path beyond the cataclysmic status quo. While under no circumstances should Palestinian liberation be delayed until accepted by a majority of Jews in Israel, it is simply foolish to believe that a better future can be achieved without a strong movement of Jews on the ground, one fighting for a binational future that would ultimately be more beneficial for Jewish people between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea.
Throughout our conversation, we cover a wide variety of topics and draw connections between our guests' different family histories and life experiences. Kastuś shares a bit about what it was like growing up in Belarus and leaving before returning to his homeland where he joined protests following the sham election in 2020. Mohammed shares his family's history of activism against displacement and colonization, and about his own experience as a Palestinian student in an Israeli university following October 7th. By drawing on these stories and more, we offer and problematize parallels between the experiences of European Jews and those of Palestinians in order to explore how they relate to more generalized experiences of oppression, displacement, and intersectional solidarity organizing.
One point that came up for me amid discussing the increasing militarization of borders is the horrendous situation on the Polish-Belarusian border. It has been going on for 4 years at this point, even after the election of a liberal government in Poland. If you haven't heard about this crisis before, please check out some of the links I've added to the description. Especially given the current crackdown against migrants in America, it is all the more important to resist the current ethno-nationalist surge and fight for a world which guarantees freedom of movement and residence, something that should surely resonate with Jews with even a basic grasp of our people's history.
Thank you so much to our audience and supporters. If you appreciate what we're doing here and want to support grassroots diasporist media, please leave us a rating on your podcast platform of choice. Consider supporting us on Patreon, follow us on Instagram, and share our content with your communities. Any or all of these actions help us a lot more than you realize. With all that out of the way, we hope you enjoy the conversation.
Sag nicht einmal aus, du gehst den letzten Weg. Wenn Himmel in der Pleien vorstehen, am neuen See. Weil kommen wird noch unser Reisger weg, das schon. Es wird ab heute unser Trott, wir feiern dort.
Kostas, Mohammed, it's really lovely to finally sit down with you two. So just to get started, you two come from very different backgrounds, but you find yourself today sitting in Tel Aviv and have been working together doing activist work, really, really crucial activist work in these moments. I was wondering if we could start by having you tell us about how you guys got to know each other. How did you meet? What type of work have you been doing together?
Okay, do you want to tell the story or shall I tell it from my end?
You tell it from your end.
Well, like a couple of months ago, there was a protest in front of the Ministry of Defense against the war. And, you know, at the end of the protest, the fascist police, they like to arrest some people. And they don't have any warrant for arrest, so they just arrest people based on if they saw them, like, walking on the street or, you know, just, like, for jaywalking. Like, it's so dumb. So they arrested these two lovely guys.
It was Roma and Leon.
Yeah, and
Roma is Ukrainian, Leon
is...
and it's the, it's
okay.
the Korea.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, so they arrested these two guys, and we're sitting, like, we're waiting for them to just be let go by the police. And I see this guy singing in Russian or in a Slavic language, and he's, like, singing very loudly. And I look at him, and they're like, damn, he has like a great jaw. Like, he has a great jawline. Like, who is this guy? And I just approached him, like, hey, we started talking and this and that. And that's how we got to, like, know each other. That was, like, the first time. It was just on a whim. Like, I was with my friends. He was with his friends. So, that was that. And
Just such a legendary jawline.
That's how we met. And we spent, like, almost the rest of the night together. Like, we walked together. We went back to, like, the hub of, like, the organization that organized the protest. We went back, we talked, and we stayed in contact, and we stayed friends. So yeah, that was that.
Cool.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you.
So it's just the legendary jawline was just like, gotta meet, gotta chat at a protest.
No, but the situation is interesting because we're about to leave, and my friend is being arrested by the police for supposedly blocking the road. And so I started saying a lot of mean things to the police about how they get an early pension. And now, in essence, who is a policeman? It's someone who hasn't worked a day in their lives and something like that. And then I just start singing Bella Ciao and Belarusian partisan songs. And I get so offended by partisan songs. It's like, what are you guys partisans? You're not partisans. So yeah. I remember specifically that moment, and when we were leaving, we were singing also, and I got all of that on video, like long Palestinian resistance songs. It was amazing. It was an amazing day.
Wow.
It was a great day.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, I met Kostas when I went to Palestine in May 2023, and I really remember you singing probably similar songs in Masaferiyata.
Just wanted to say that my name is Kastuś. I'm Konstantin. It's okay. I just want to clarify. I'm Konstantin, but because I'm from Belarus, I prefer people to call me Kastuś. That's okay.
Thank you for the clarification.
It's Kastuś, like Kastuś Kalinowski, yes.
On that subject, actually, I think, Kastuś, you're the first Belarusian guest that we've had, and I'm very interested in that part of my background because while I have been able to visit the places where my family comes from in Latvia, in Rezekne, in eastern Latgalia, I haven't yet been able to, or haven't tried even, to visit Vitebsk, and also a little place that I'm going to shout out that used to be called Drissa, but now I think is called Verkhnjadvinsk, which is very near the Latvian border as well. And so from my perspective, my family history in Belarus goes much further. I think I have some distant relatives who are at least still alive, or at least were alive after World War II. But I'm curious to hear, like, what is your background growing up Jewish in Belarus and then moving to Israel?
So my background, my mom was always like Jewish, but what I need to clarify what that means. By saying Jewish in Belarus, I think she was part of the Chabad, but because she isn't really like a halacha Jew, she was kind of just like a wannabe Jew, sort of. But I was raised as a Jew by her, and at least, while my father's tried to raise me as a Buddhist because he was Buddhist, which was also a bit weird. I actually just recently made a little documentary about like the history of my family from like my mother's side. I invaded my grandmother's and grandfather's apartment with a camera and asked them all sorts of questions about what our relatives were. And so I can say that my relatives are, almost all of them are Jewish, but at some point the Second World War starts and my great-grandfather is in the battle for Moscow, gets taken into a POW camp because he pretends he's Armenian. And then he gets put to work in Belgium. Then he runs away on a bicycle, and then they catch him, and then they put him in one of the death camps. And he doesn't remember which one because he only talked about it once and told it to my grandmother, and grandma doesn't remember which camp it was exactly. But then when the Americans release him, he goes back to the Soviet Union because his mom is in jail for being the wife of enemy of the state. who was shot in 1937 for working for an American embassy as an interpreter, because he came he left to the United States in 1917, as far as I remember, and he came back in the 1920s and worked, and then in 1937 they accused him and took his whole apartment also. With that, like, my grandma suspects that it was like a so-called donos, like when somebody writes a letter that they think they're a spy. When somebody was like, there was the policy in the Soviet Union, if you have like a lot of rooms, if you have like a big apartment, you get other people to live with you, like the government forces you to. So yeah, that's at least the part that I know. I also know that my great grandfather was also a very like important veterinary in the Soviet Union, but he was also executed in 1937 because in that year specifically a lot of cows died, and apparently he was the responsible one, which got me so curious, like, because I never heard that story, that I had veterinaries in my lineage, and now I actually want to go volunteer in a dog shelter, and I'm actually considering this career.
It's always interesting when you like discover that you have like a certain career in your family history, and then you're like, oh, maybe there's something like deeper in why I'm drawn to this, rather than it just being like a whim. Like I found that actually with like teaching and education. Like I have a rather large amount of teachers on both sides of my family history, and I didn't realize that until last few years. And I was like, oh, that's kind of neat. Maybe there's just like a draw to wanting to educate the next generation in my blood. Though, of course, I don't think anything can be reduced to just blood or DNA. Want to clarify that. But something in my soul, perhaps.
Souls. And so with this background, you grew up in Belarus, and now you don't find yourself anymore in Belarus. So what's the story behind that?
The story behind leaving Belarus begins in 2009, when my mom remarries to also another person from Minsk, but who came to Israel in the 90s with his first family, and then he migrated to Australia with his first family, and then he divorced, and then he came back to Minsk, and then he remarried with my mom right after she divorced my dad. And so in 2009 he had he used the talent visa. I guess there was a small opening for talent visas. My stepfather had the specific technology, like being a software engineer or something. So he got the visa, and he was able to bring my mom and me. So I'm one of those really weirdly, extremely lucky Belarusians, maybe 1 out of 10 people that got to actually grow up in Australia instead of Minsk, Belarus. I grew up there for 5 years. I lived in 4 years in Melbourne, studied in the Russian embassy. There was a school in the Russian embassy, and I attended that school. Also with my regular Australian school. I also went to Sunday Jewish school, which was in Russian also. That's the kind of things we had there in Australia. I started learning Hebrew in a synagogue back there in Canberra. And then in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea, my family, we all received the Australian passport. And for some reason, my mom and my stepdad just decided to move back to Minsk. I don't know. I was happy about that. I didn't like living in Australia, honestly. I wanted to go back to Minsk. And people are always weirded out by that. Why would you want to leave Australia? I never wanted to go to Australia in the first place. It's my family that decided that it would be a good place to move there. But yeah, in 2014 I go back to Minsk and started going to school again, study. And that was a very, very weird experience because everybody, the language changed. Those 5 years that I wasn't at home, people started using so much more English words in their speech. It just got me off. Wow. And of course, everybody's aware of the dictatorship and Lukashenko and everything. And it was kind of weird being the only Jew for the whole school, because I was always asking for a separate food, because in post-Soviet schools you have a canteen where there's cooks and they cook virtually the same food for everyone. It's like a meat cutlet and some puree or maybe some pasta or maybe some schnitzel. So it's almost always pork, almost always.
Do you keep kosher?
I kept kosher back in Minsk. Now not really, I don't. So being the only Jew in school was weird. It was interesting because everybody knows you. I had the best nickname. It was Holocausta. It was the best nickname. Yeah, you guys understood it, right? My name is Kostya, so it's like Holocaustia.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
How did you feel about that? That seems iffy.
First, I didn't like it, but now I think it was a good nickname. I think I earned it. whatever you're being called, you have to wear the nickname with pride, you know?
Yeah, I know the feeling of being the only Jew in my primary school in Poland, which was always fun and never had any troubles because of that. But yeah, anyway, and so you were involved in the protests against Lukashenko when they were the most rampant in 2020, 2021?
In 2021, no. In 2020, on the 10th of August, I had the opportunity to visit my hometown, the city of Minsk, right after the election. So the election was on the 9th, and I came 4 in the morning on the 10th. And I remember watching these crazy videos of people getting shot on the street with Molotov cocktails and huge crowds and battles on the streets and everything. And all these videos I'm watching sitting in Israel in the airport planning to go there. And then when I get there, no internet. The internet is shut off for the whole country. Nobody can watch these videos and barely anyone even knows what's going on. All you can hear is people talking on the street about the protests. Everybody you're passing by in the metro in very busy areas, you can hear everybody's conversation is about the same topic. That was really, really interesting. So for the first 3 days, I didn't have internet like most people. Nobody was really sure what was going on. I was showing my friends the videos that I watched whilst I was in Israel because they got downloaded on my phone. And then I went to get a haircut, and there was a guy who just said, I know this VPN that works. And he just got it for me. He just got me the VPN. He installed it. And then I went and installed that VPN for maybe 10 or 15 other people, including my parents' relatives. And we could, again, really, or at least partially understand what's going on. And then I got my film camera, and then I started, on the fourth day, I think, I started walking around the city freely because all I was hearing was car honks and shots in the air. So when I was on the fourth day just walking around the center of the city, I was avoiding police and I was taking a lot of pictures, and there were just crowds of people. I even got spontaneously into one of the first feminist resistance gatherings, which I didn't know was even planned. I was just getting a t-shirt for my mom in a very specific store. Then I go out and I see there's a line of women all dressed in white. And then the next days, more and more crowds appeared, all dressed in white. The white, red, and white flag everywhere, which was also, I remember back in 2017 when I wanted to attend a protest for Liberation Day, Dень Воли, on the 25th of March. It's also my grandma's birthday, gonna be very soon. My mom just didn't let me because it's known that on this day there's a lot of arrests. If you just hang out the white, red, white flag out of your window, maybe maximum 30 minutes, you're going to have it up because in 30 minutes a crane is going to show up and put it down and you're going to be fined. In this situation we've been living before the elections, it's total dictatorship. And then during the elections on the 10th, on the next day, I remember all of the houses had at least one white and red white flag. So it was just people all dressed in white, smiling with the band flag. It was a city like I've never seen it before, even though I lived most of my life there.
Police state harassing people for flying flags. Sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Eerily familiar.
Palestinian flags aren't really allowed to be flown within the legal borders of Israel, are they?
It was relatively new. I would think after October 7th, the suppression was fully on. But you could feel it coming. I want to say in 2022, 2023, before the war, I was a student at the University of Tel Aviv, which is one of the most, it houses the most students across the country. Mm-hmm. And there was protest, there was suppression. The suppression started before the war. Before the war, they banned the use of the Palestinian flag on campus for protesting, which they protested afterwards. And then a couple of months later, the war hit. And the war, I guess, justified most of the suppression and most of the tactics that Israelis started using, and especially ramping up to the extreme. They turned it on full volume. Come on, let's go. Full on fascism. Now we have a reason for it, which sucks, but, it is what it is nowadays.
What was that like studying at the university? Because on one hand, universities will generally are considered to be spaces of, more liberal relationship, student political organizing, including like within Israelis in comparison to the rest of society. At the other hand, Israeli universities are under a lot of pressure, at least from the international perspective, because there's a lot of academic boycott campaigning that are happening. So what was that like? Like, what are the kinds of attitudes that you experienced personally and organizing politically that was visible and deemed acceptable, majority opinion and such?
Well, I'm gonna start it like this. When I started university, I started with a clean slate. Like I took a break from activism because I was burnt out, and because also to do it while doing university is kind of tough and takes a lot of time and energy. So I took some time off, but I still tried to make the people or make the other students still understand to some extent. I had some relatively like liberal classmates, but you do have the occasion ex-soldier or the occasional like ex-cop, which there is a lot. Most of them are ex-soldiers / ex-cops. You kind of still feel the difference between both of us. When like on my first couple of days, they can say, oh, well, like I paid practically all of my college tuition off my service. Like the service paid it for me. Or, yeah, well, I didn't serve, but the service is paying for my tuition. And after I finish, I'm going to do service for like 2 years. Like you can feel while I'm here, like over here working 2 jobs, trying to make ends meet, trying to pay my tuition and pay my rent. But then like slowly but surely you start like knowing these people, and and there are people, they're like, it's funny to say, but like me as an ex-activist and as Palestinian, like you see cops, you see soldiers, like you don't see them human. You see them as like this monster that's out there in some way to get you. And specifically like named Mohammed, it was tough for me, but I was still with an open mind, and I had made a lot of friends. And during my second year of uni, like the war started, and it was tough. It was tough specifically because I was in a degree that I want to say 99% was Jewish and Israeli. So most of them served in a term, it's called like miluim, which is, the service that came because of the war. And I had some friends who like sent me some messages like, hey, I'm sorry to do this. I know we talked about this, but I have to serve. So my first semester after the war started, like it was mostly Zoom, and it was Zoom meetings like meant for 40-50 participants, but there were only 5 or 6, and I was always one of them, which made me feel like there's some sort of disconnect. And that disconnect slightly grew more and more, especially like I felt it the most when I had the kafiyeh on my dorm window to use to block the sun. So one day I received a letter from the dorms like, take it off. This is a yellow card. Take it off. Your next one, we're gonna have to kick you out. So I had to take it off. Yeah, I had to like also remove the flag from my dorm. I wouldn't say it's fascist, but it kind of is. And the last straw for me during uni was during my last semester before I took a break off from studying, was seeing like war rooms operate in the university itself. Like you see uniforms, you see everything. There is a war room specifically that uses like AI technology and technology for mapping Gaza in the Tel Aviv University, which I don't know much details, but that's all I know, and that's what I saw. And it's sad to see that the militarization of the academy, which the academy and students are usually in history lead the revolution. But for us, they're the ones who lead the fascism, who lead the occupation.
Jesus Christ.
Which, yeah, that's one way to put it.
It's interesting. Some of the things you said, once you do have to interact with people on a daily basis, you do sort of realize that they are people and they are shaped by different systems. That doesn't change like the harm that is caused, of course, but that is how that works. I think it's also interesting what you said, because that's not a point that I had thought of when looking at the sort of state of education in Israel, because generally speaking, it's accepted that education in Israel is desegregated at the university level. Before that, it's segregated. But the fact that, college tuition and army service does have an impact on the quality of the education that you have. And of course, we know what the situation is with conscription in Israel and which groups serve and which don't serve. And that's something that I hadn't thought about. So thank you very much for mentioning that.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to ask a question that I assume the answer would be no, based off of what you said about the university students leading the fascism rather than the revolution. Was there any, I mean, I know you also said that you kind of took a step back from activism/organizing while you were being a student. And especially in a moment like that, I can imagine how difficult it would be. But was there any attempts by Palestinian students to organize any opposition to this? Or was there just kind of such a repressive atmosphere that wasn't even thinkable in that moment?
To their credit, a lot of students did organize, did do some protests, but also to their detriment, in other universities, you can also look this up, like in the most, I guess, technologically advanced university, which is called Technion, a month maybe or two, like less than a month after the war, the dean of students, they posted a list of Palestinian students that came out against the war, and like it was crazy.
Holy shit.
But when you try to speak out, they do target you. Like, I don't want to say like target, but in that sense. But in Tel Aviv, it was really quiet. Most when the alarms hit on Saturday, most Palestinian students who live more north than Tel Aviv, like went back home to their families. I didn't. But there was still some protest, but it came really late. It came when people realized this is not a war, this is a genocide. It came in March. There was a big protest with Palestinian flags, with kafiyas that I was at. But besides that, there was some small protests even before the war during the suppression of the Palestinian flag and the Palestinian identity in the university. But in terms of like true protesting, making a change, unfortunately there isn't. And I guess because it's sad for us, Palestinians who are 48ers, who live with Palestinian descent but Israeli IDs, is that we often discard our identity in pursuit of a career, which is sad, but I get it sometimes. But at the same time, I couldn't do it. Like, I realized that after the war, I'm not going to do that. It's going to be very hard for me, considering I come from a family who all of them resisted in their own way.
No, I think that's so important. I think what you just said about Palestinian students being like having lists of their names come out, that's really, really scary, honestly. That sounds, I mean, we're starting to see stuff like that in the US with like Mahmoud Khalil being disappeared by the state. Really horrifying to see that kind of internationalize.
Well, I guess Israelis and Americans share tactics, so
Clearly.
Consider that.
If this is like family history, then we don't have to speak about it with too much detail. But the sentence "resisted in their own way" is, I think, very important and might deserve some unpacking, at least, because when we talk about like what is considered, resistance, support resistance, a lot of the time this is, and there are also parallels that you could talk about this regarding like World War II, regarding, resistance often gets tied up with the most militaristic, gun in hand. That's connected to all sorts of different ideas of like militarism and macho, like masculine, like physical muscular resistance and fighting. But the reality is that that's, for many, that's not an option that seems either realistic or practical or maybe even desirable given their current circumstances. And so there's this, of course, the concept of sumud, of steadfastness for Palestinians is very important, and that doesn't really rely on that same sort of understanding. But if, you said that you're from al-Fahm, if I understand correctly, a lot of that area of the triangle was very much a lot of the main sort of support for protests starting with Land Day in 1976 come from that area. Is that like what you talk about when it's like resistance in their own way as well? Or would you like to expand on that a bit?
Yeah, I'll expand on that. Funny, we're coming up on Land Day at the end of the month too, so funny you mentioned that. I will give a little backstory about my family.
Please.
Mostly like my dad's side, because my mom's side, like they were farmers, like my grandpa and my grandma, so there isn't much history. But my grandpa, during the British Mandate, as he was becoming a teenager, he went to Lebanon to start studying medicine. And then the mandate ended and the recognition of the Israeli state came to be. So he had to come back. And when he came back, they started attacking his village. He had to leave his village, unfortunately, burned, destroyed houses and all that. And he immigrated to al-Fahm. And he taught my uncles, me as well included, about his history, about how it is really family trauma. So my uncles from my dad's side and my dad included, there's a lot, but most of them were activists, were part of like the intifadas, were part of protests, even extreme ones to that extent. Like I know at least 4, including my dad, of my uncles who got arrested. My dad got arrested during the first intifada. They accused him of throwing a Molotov on a police car. He says he didn't, allegedly. So we don't know about that. But like my uncles, when I was younger, used to get arrested regularly on a regular basis for like one time, like a vice president of a branch of the IDF came to do like a tour of the triangle area. And as soon as he started coming into al-Fahm, everyone went out to protest on his like car / tour bus. And my uncle threw a shoe and he got arrested for it.
Classic.
So we try, like, in some ways. I also got detained multiple times, got arrested one time. So we try. I mean, I come from a background that is proud of our Palestinian identity a lot. I'll say one thing that my grandpa taught me that sat with me till this day. Like, he told me pre-occupation, like, to some extent, Muslims, Jews, and Christians lived in harmony, lived in peaceful time. As much as it was, still was a British mandate, there still was some discrimination. But they told me it was some brotherly love. And he told me, like, that's not your enemy. The thing you should take down is not Jewishness. It's the country or the government itself, the idea of the occupation, of the non-equality that is existent here.
Again, that touches on many interesting points. I mean, one of the things, of course, that, as your grandfather mentioned, like the generation of even people like having contact with each other, because of course we know that, you know, the relationship between Jewish immigrants during the mandate and the Palestinian population, like, it was very often not harmonious. Like, they were depended very much on local conditions and such. But what matters to some extent is that there was contact. Like, people knew each other, not always neighbors, but at least they interacted in some way. And a similar thing is the case in Gaza, right? Like, there used to be in Gaza a lot more of contact at an interpersonal level between Jews and Muslims, Israelis and Palestinians. But now, for like a whole generation, that's been much, much less. And so that presupposes, I think, or maybe it doesn't presuppose, but it leads to also like a level of separation from one to the other.
I think, yeah, you hit it right on the mark. I think if you travel across the country and you visit every area, every city, you will see the difference in between which are more progressive thinking and which are more, let's say, nationalist thinking. In the sense that the more you close, you get to like Palestinian/Arabic villages that neighbor Jewish/Israeli villages, you get more of the progressive thinking. Let's think of Haifa, for example, which I think, in my opinion, as much as sometimes it pains me to see like the things that have been happening there since the war, but it really like defies the term coexistence. You have Russians who aren't Jewish per se. You have Palestinians, both Muslims and Christians. You have Druze, and you have Jewish slash Israelis who all live there, and even like Muslims, Christian, immigrants from African descent. Everyone lives in the same area. Everyone is okay with each other. You hear every single language. You see every single color, and it is proven like by statistics from maybe municipality like elections that it is the most progressive thinking. But then you go, for example, to like Rishon LeZion, where it's far away from any Arabic village, and you'll see how racist, how nationalist it is, which unfortunate, but it is the state of this land.
And it's also, this is part of the paradox of Tel Aviv, right? Because Tel Aviv, on one hand, likes to present itself as a very sort of liberal, cosmopolitan city, but then also Tel Aviv has a very small, like minority Palestinian population. Jaffa is different, right? But Tel Aviv itself does not have a very big Palestinian population.
Tel Aviv has a humanitarian crisis going on. There's hungry people next to the central bus station. We had a food not bombs action there one time. It was like really looked bad, honestly. So yeah, Tel Aviv is very, very different. It has so many contrasting neighborhoods. One neighborhood is totally different from the situation of people of the state there, the other, sorry. There's also a gentrification campaign right now aimed at destroying the Yiddish Museum, possibly the most unique Yiddish places, not only here in Israel, but I think in the world, because it's a very, very, very large library and very, very sad story.
Just a Jewish state supporting Jewish culture in all its diversity.
Oh yeah, in the 1950s, Mapai activists even beat up Yiddish speakers in Tel Aviv, as far as I know.
Going on Tel Aviv, it's funny because I'll say just one thing that happened during my stay in Tel Aviv. After the war, I invited a friend over because it was like not ceasefire, but at some point you kind of stopped hearing sirens. You start feeling safety. Like I always felt safe in Tel Aviv, even during the war. Like I barely entered any safe spaces when the sirens hit because I knew I'm in Tel Aviv. Like, let's be real. Let's not get tricked by these sirens. But anyways, not gonna get into that much. But you walk down the street and after the war, there is looks. You get some sort of tone from strangers when you talk in Arabic. So one time right here in like the south of Tel Aviv, Florentine area, which supposedly is the progressive area of Tel Aviv, I was walking with two of my friends on a friend birthday, and we're Palestinians, we're gonna talk in Arabic. And we got like a beer thrown near us, like, hey, you Hamas supporters, go back to Gaza or whatever. And it's funny because Tel Aviv tries to paint itself as this capital of the Middle East, the peace, the pink washing, the everything. But if you see Tel Aviv for what it is, it's terrible. Yeah, unfortunately it is. But that's what you get when you have 2 million people. You're gonna see people from every different background, and unfortunately mostly from racist, brainwashed backgrounds.
It's still a large city in Israel. When you look at the Palestine solidarity movement in the United States, we've actually gotten some, I'm going to kindly call it constructive criticism after our last episode on this topic, which was with Becca.
Very kindly.
Yeah, it was not constructive. With Becca Strober, who describes herself as an Israeli. She goes on Instagram as Becca Explains the Occupation. She does a lot of, frankly, really good work explaining to Jews how the occupation of the West Bank functions. And she's from the US, and some people see her identifying as an Israeli and get really upset that we platformed her because they see, oh, this is Zionism. They described us as liberal Zionists for doing that.
I'm not Israeli. I don't have Israeli citizenship. I'm Belarusian and Australian, but I'm not Israeli. I even don't have a Teudat Zehut because the border police stole it from me a few weeks ago. So yeah.
interesting to hear that.
Well, yeah. Well, for me, it's a dumb topic. I'm just gonna get my point across about this.
Please.
But as long as you're born in Israel, you are considered Israeli. For me, as a Palestinian, I truly don't care where you come from, who you are, as long as you show the right way of solidarity, the right way of being active for the Palestinian case. It doesn't matter, does it? Like
Yeah.
it comes back to whatever is happening with the BDS and no other land, or they're normalizing the occupation. No, it's a movie about criticizing the occupation that happens to be made by an Israeli guy who knew the occupation is wrong.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we get blindsided by labeled as Israeli. So no, it's probably propaganda.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I think it's really important. I was kind of bringing this up to get your perspective on it because I do think it's actually splitting the movement for solidarity with Palestinians to be like, oh, you can't platform these people because they identify with this label and we're against this label, so that's bad and you're bad for doing that. And seeing people get upset about the No Other Land documentary, which I think is a very important documentary. I think it's hugely significant that they won the Oscar. And also, like, let's be real, like, an Oscar isn't going to free Palestine. And sadly, it seems like it's not even providing much relief for the communities that film is about. But I think it's important to go beyond labels and think about it. I think what you were just saying, Kastuś, about you not being an Israeli and not having citizenship is something I'd like to go into a little bit. Because obviously, when you fled Belarus, you could have gone to Australia. And I guess I was kind of curious what led you to make the choice to go where you ended up going.
Obviously, my family lives here. Obviously, everything is because of my family and because I had friends here. And then I wasn't always aware like of the occupation. It's only when I came here, I already didn't want to come here. I knew that this was a terrible place. First time I came to Israel, I was 6 years old. I never wanted to come back. I still had to come with my family like on vacations when I was little. And then suddenly, boom, I'm put into a boarding school and I'm like, oh no. And they're asking, okay, guys, who wants to enlist into the IDF? And everyone's like, everyone who wants to enlist to this side and everyone who doesn't want to enlist to this side. And I was the only one who went to the left side, to the side that didn't want to enlist.
Wait, how old
And then
were
I
you?
learned 16.
Oh my god.
I was already like in school in Belarus, starting to get into like there was a very interesting artivism movement going on in Belarus in 2017, kind of like a wave of a lot of artists doing street art, and I was kind of in that wave stream doing whatever needed to be done. And then all of a sudden you're put into this environment where they're trying to make an Israeli soldier out of you. And that just kind of got me like so upset because I couldn't really come back to Belarus. I mean, I could, but I didn't have any family there left.
Mm-hmm.
And that meant if I came back to Belarus, I would lose my visa status here. So I wouldn't be able to come back here unless like I was a tourist. And that's totally different because your whole family lives here. Like you rely on your family basically for your life when you're 16 still, kind of.
I think Ben has mentioned his encounter of like the first time when Ben went to Israel and like realized this place is a little messed up with like the scale, you know which one I'm talking about, like I don't know which episode that was, maybe Ben you remember. The first time that I came to Israel was when I was like 11 years old and it was just for a vacation with my family in Eilat. So I don't know if that really counts as like visiting and seeing Israel. Yeah. I'm being judged, but one of the things that I realized when
I've also
came
been to Eilat. It's okay, sorry, I know.
Yeah, sorry, Rash. But one of the things that I remember seeing was going into a shopping mall in Eilat and like having your bag checked by security, and like this seemed so strange to me because like growing up in Poland, like why would security check your bags when you're going into a shopping mall? Not like a just any sort of public place that was closed. And I don't know, ever since then, the sort of argument of like, oh, this is a place for Jewish safety sort of seemed strange to me. Like you think of these things when you notice them from the outside, like the idea of, oh yeah, we all have like the safe room in our houses for the rockets. We're all used to like, oh yeah, the sirens can come off every few months or every few years because there's rockets coming. Yeah, like we have to serve in the army and you're going to be put in prison if you don't. Oh yeah, like there's, like whatever, stabbings or bombings. Like this doesn't seem in many ways like a very safe environment to me. And it's just sort of like assumed it has to be like this, right? Like there's no solution in like the mainstream perspective. Of course, there's the Iron Dome. Of course, there's going to be rockets. Of course, we have to check the bags. Ein brera.
Yeah, I mean, or the only solution is a two-state solution that neither sides want. Neither Palestinians or the vast majority of Jewish Israelis really want a two-state solution. At least that's what it seems like from my outside perspective looking in. It seems like the only solution that's really talked about at the international perspective is really not a solution that is really viable. I mean, especially when one of those states is two or even many more cantons that don't actually have any territorial continuity, which means that that's not really a viable state at all.
Sounds like a federation.
Yeah, speaking about the controversial two-state solution, I'm not going to give my take, but I'll say this. There's a lot of Israelis and there's a lot of Palestinians living on this land specifically. I am, for one step, at least the first step is stopping the occupation. But if you go to the West Bank, if you go to, I guess, any Palestinian, like PA controlled area, you will see people don't care about which solution, whether it be one state, two state, whatever state. They just want peace. They want to go back to their homes. They want their kids to grow up in a peaceful environment, in a place where their children can grow to be whatever they want and not have their children struggle as they did and as their parents did. So yeah, that's it. I guess at least like some Palestinians don't care about which solution it is. But I'll say the Palestinians and Israelis in diaspora, they are the ones who push this one-state solution. The diaspora Israelis who live in the US or UK or wherever it be, they are the ones who say, oh, well, we're not going to live there as long as there's like terrorists. And you have the Palestinians in Chicago or in Berlin who say, well, as long as there are Jewish people there, we're not going to go back to Palestine. And it's no, guys. Like, both sides will be here forever, and they were here before you guys were even born. So just live with it, and let's just move on for peace.
That's an interesting thing I've been thinking about recently. Like, of all the sort of vocabulary that we're used to in the context of Israel-Palestine, occupation, apartheid, terrorism, war, conflict, and people have, various associations with this or that, resistance. The idea of peace has really been on the decline since, the 1990s, the idea of like the peace movement, we support peace, we're uniting for peace. And there's various different ways of associating that. Some people say that we shouldn't use peace as much as an idea because peace just means like quiet, like we're not hearing stuff, especially from the outside, like we're not hearing about what's going on in Israel-Palestine, therefore that's peace, when that's very clearly not what's happening. And then there'll be other people that will say that there's no such thing as peace without freedom. Malcolm X quote, how can a man be at peace when he has no freedom? What do you guys like in terms of the idea of, also rebuilding the peace movement in Israel, support from the outside for peace? How important is this word? And we can sort of speak a little bit about what your organizing involvement, what's happening now on the ground. Just today, there's been news that the Israeli army has conducted new airstrikes in Gaza. I don't like playing the sort of game of like, who broke the ceasefire first? Who, one side accuses the other side accuses the other, and like, who do you trust about secret negotiations and stuff like that, whatever. But the reality is it seems like the sort of tenuous ceasefire as it was negotiated in January is breaking down and collapsing. We don't know what's going to continue. We've seen stuff about what's been going on in the West Bank, and tens of thousands of people being driven out of their homes by the Israeli army. And so what's the situation on the ground now, and how does this relate to this idea of peace for both of you?
From my end, I can say that all we can do, me and Mohammed, is just mostly amplify the voices, just talk about what's going on and document it more systematically. And systematically also we have to publish it so that people can see it. And yeah, the Gaza ceasefire broke again. You have anything to say about that?
I guess it was tough hearing the news, I want to say. But in terms of peace, like, unfortunately, what I'll say about whatever a ceasefire is nowadays, if you can call it a ceasefire, I don't think there will be a ceasefire in terms of, let's compare it to like something, maybe if you guys have older or younger brothers, let's compare it. So like, let's say you have a console to play at home and you only have one controller. And you're, let's say, the older brother, and your younger brother also wants to play. But as long as your parent is not there, he's not gonna play. You're gonna be the one playing most of the time. Like, this goes back, I think, to what the ceasefire is. Like, there will be no ceasefire as long as there is no outside power, I guess, taking away from Israel, like, the huge advantage it has on whatever resistance group there is gonna be in Palestine. Like, it doesn't matter what. Like, they're still going against a country which is considered second, if not most technologically warfare advanced state and army. So, you know, as long as baby daddy US is not taking away those powers, there's not gonna be a ceasefire. It's the bombing, the settler expansions. It's still gonna unfortunately take place every single day. It's sad, really, but it is the reality we live in. It is the reality that we can't beg the Israeli government to do anything because we know it's not gonna stop. So you have to beg UN, US, and no one is answering the call. So, you know, it's unfortunate.
Yeah. And I think that's, as like someone in the United States, it's really important to recognize that we have a role to play. And as the American Jewish community, so many people that come and settle in the West Bank are American Jews. I mean, Meir Kahane was an American Jew. Baruch Goldstein, American Jew. Some of the most violent settler fascists that are doing the violence. If it's not the military that's directly pushing people out of their homes, it's the fascist gangs that are coming out of the settlements.
Yakov Fauci, if I won't steal it, someone else will steal it.
Yeah, and it's like really important to recognize that these are the sources for a lot of these people. And it's so important for us to call out the fact that these communities are actively contributing to the violence on the ground, and to think about how we can actually change that, because it's not going to happen overnight, but we have a role to play in terms of ending the supply of people that is coming into this land and causing and escalating violence every day.
And it's also a question of like some sort of exciting Jewish future that we can build in diaspora, because there's a section of the Jewish community for whom the idea of let's basically be cowboys and Indians in the West Bank and pursue our civilization and, you know, develop our ancestral homeland. It's the idea of like excitement and contribution and a way of being Jewish, which is horrible. But the fact is that that's what gets support. And I think that part of resisting that is also building something exciting and more moral and interesting of our own ways of being Jewish that are rooted in collective liberation and not in ethnic separatism. Because if you take the perspective that the world hates us, they will always hate us, they tried to murder all of us, and this is a racist world towards us, so it doesn't really matter if we're racist, because that's just how it is. And why do you care about us? Because everybody else is doing this. Like, that's what leads to the support of that. And of course, it's not just limited to the American Jewish community. It's also the American political establishment. It's Christian Zionism. It's the military-industrial complex. You know, in the British Empire, Cyprus was called an unsinkable aircraft carrier because it was just such a good base of their support, of exerting. I mean, still, yes, there's British presence in Cyprus and Equatorial and Dhekelia. But in the same way, like, Israel plays a great role for America in that way. So it absolutely is the case. These ways of support are most explicit with the United States because, you know, largest military supplier, veto at the Security Council, you know, world's greatest superpower, at least for now. But it's also the question, to different extents around the world and in our communities. And so that's why it's also relevant to us, and it's happening in our name. And that's why, even though we concentrate on, diaspora jury and diaspora perspectives, the reason as to why we speak about Israel-Palestine is because this is happening in our name. This is the project that is exciting in that way. And so we bring this perspective on.
I do have a question for Mohammed and Kastuś, because Kastuś, you and I met doing work in Masafer Yatta in the West Bank. And obviously this work is really, really important in terms of building any kind of future, of building solidarity between communities in the West Bank and the beyond. But I'm really not sure how much that is really possible for Palestinians, for 48 Palestinians. Like, Mohammed, are you able to go and do that kind of work? Or does the fact that you're a Palestinian make it so that you're not able to go over there? Or obviously, if you do, you're under much increased danger just because you're perceived as a Palestinian.
Well, to your question, there's two answers. It is easier for me to travel the West Bank. As a Palestinian 48er, you're allowed into all areas. ABC does not matter. They won't ask you questions. But the harder it is, it's mostly my name. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it's mostly my name. Usually when I do like protective presence in the West Bank, I try to tell people, hey, try not to call me by my first name. Because if a settler hears Mohammed, he's not gonna think, is he an Israeli citizen or he's a Palestinian? He's gonna see red. He's just gonna see red, and it's not gonna be a comfortable day for both of us. So mostly what's on my mind when I'm in the West Bank or even East Jerusalem in any type of activism, it's usually the anxious waiting of being detained, because usually the army / the police is less forgiving for us 48ers / Palestinians. And also it's more dangerous for us as Palestinians, doesn't matter from which side you were born in front of a settler, because a settler does not care. He doesn't follow any laws, and no laws will judge him if he kills anyone, which is unfortunate and sad, but that's the reality. Like, that's mostly the tough parts of traversing the West Bank activism.
I have permanent residency in Israel, so I had a blue Taudat Zehut, so I could even travel to Area A also legally, because I'm not an Israeli. Again, it's nice. And I always just tell everyone, whoever's asking me where I'm from, I always say that I'm from Belarus. Occasionally, usually, every time when somebody wants to catch me off guard, Palestinians start speaking Hebrew to me to see if I reply. And I have to not reply. I have to make sure that I don't speak Hebrew. I'm from Belarus. Remember that. It's very easy for me compared to Mohammed. But when I lived in Belarus, it was hard to get into the EU. It was always 8-hour border crossing. It always took 6 to 8 hours. From Minsk to get to Vilnius, it's a 2-hour train ride or a car ride. Well, at least before the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. I guess you could still actually travel. I think the Latvian border is open, but most checkpoints between Belarus and the EU are also closed. And there's trenches and fences being built as of now, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
I guess I'll also take the opportunity to mention now that border, the Polish-Belarusian border, is also the site of very significant human rights violations. There's absolutely fault on the government of Lukashenko being very cynical in the way in which they treat migrants from the Middle East and other places. But absolutely the role of the Polish government, as a Polish citizen, that's the thing that I also need to express. Basically now saying that they are going to suppress or ignore international refugee conventions is terrible. And, there are ways of supporting this. I think I'll include some in the description because we haven't really spoken about this, but it's an issue that needs to be highlighted. It's not as common, it's not as well known as, the refugee migrant routes from the Mediterranean or Southeastern Europe, but it is also something that is worth bringing up to international audience. So please, if you are listening to this, please bear that in mind, and there are ways of you to get involved. And we've done work as Jewish leftists in Poland to draw parallels as to how the treatment of migrants at the Polish-Belarusian border mirrors a lot of the treatment that Polish Jews who were expelled from Nazi Germany in 1938 and put in concentration camps, basically. That was the anniversary that was happening while the new law was announced.
I felt like this was a good place to add like one really final question, which is a question about parallels in like Palestinian and European Jewish histories. Obviously, Zach brought up the modern context, but we could look back in the history as well. I know, Kastuś, you've talked a bit about that on Instagram and stuff with your own family history.
Yeah, I talked about that. And my family was really, really unhappy about it, actually.
Really?
Really unhappy, yeah. Because it involved photos also, yeah.
Is your family not really politically aligned with you on a lot of things?
Oh, no. No.
Yeah,
my
that's
family
understandable.
is very Zionist, yes.
Yeah, people don't get to choose their family, but I think it's really
I
important
love my
to be able to
family.
see those parallels.
Yeah, I mean, it's always difficult when it comes to politics in families and divisions that you have, because
Yeah.
you know that you know people, you know they're nice, they're good, they behave well, but they have blind spots. And so that's always a challenge, because while if you disagree with someone politically, you know, at your university, you know, different organizations, you can always like make sure to go a bit harder on them. But if it's your family,
yeah. I just wanted to say I received a lot of criticism for actually just speaking about the history of my family on Instagram. I was just talking about the
About your
parallels.
grandpa.
Yeah, and I said that in the end, what happened to them, because there was German settlers also moving eastward, and there were people burnt alive in like barns, you know, like whole villages. And then that happens to like your family also, when like both of my Jewish great grandfathers, so basically, yeah, the whole family was killed. And yeah, what I see here is also I see families being wiped out. Some families that maybe didn't have a lot of friends that aren't even remembered by anyone because they're completely off any record now, and so many orphans. And we're not even talking about the chemicals that are being left in the soil and in the sea, and the fact that the West Bank is now being also under like just severe attacks and destructions daily. They're just amplifying and amplifying and amplifying. Like you can bulldoze down a whole neighborhood, just not bomb it to make it look more civil. Yeah, a lot of parallels, and it sucks for me that we are in this space and we're in these parallels, and that they do actually exist, and that they're so eerily like out there.
Yeah. And it wasn't also, I think it's crucial to say, it wasn't just Jews that were targeted in Belarus. I mean, the Nazi machine wanted to exterminate and enslave Slavs as a whole. In Belarus, obviously, hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed,
Yes,
but also
Slavs and Roma people, and also after World War II, there is almost no more Muslims left in Belarus. We had a significant Tatar Muslim minority with a mosque in Minsk. It was very, very crucial part of our society. And right now, I'm aware that there are some Muslim Tatars living in Evia, but it's also, just as the Jewish community has been de facto destroyed after also the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine, when most of the Jewish community in Belarus, as far as I know, have all emigrated or went underground. Nobody's really left.
And frankly, historical comparisons are always messy, and I think you need to engage with them with respect and nuance and stuff. But the fact that there are differences doesn't mean that it's still not worthwhile bringing up in some way, right? You can recognize this is different and yet say that despite these differences, I personally am impacted in this way to move, right?
Oh yeah, of course, because all native people are connected. All people are connected, because most people they think they're native, but they haven't become native yet. Just all people are connected. I don't know, it's just humanity.
And what does it mean to be a native person? I mean,
Don't we just look similar also? Like,
you both have facial hair and and faces.
yeah, and 2 eyes and a nose and a mouth.
And a soul.
What makes me different from you? Yeah, I don't
Exactly.
understand that.
What I wanted to add is like the similarity. If you can see specifically, I think I keep on seeing on social media, specifically in the UK. I don't know why the UK specifically, but like Holocaust survivors going to pro-Palestine protests, which makes me happy. First of all. Second of all, you can see, unfortunately, a lot of people had to endure, the Holocaust in the 40s. And I can't know, unfortunately, I can never fully understand, but I can empathize on what the people went through. But going through a radical event, very, very radical event like that, had to bring on radical ideas like Zionism. And at the end of the day, you can understand where some of those radical ideas came to be, which also is doing so under occupation. Like, you can't go occupy people, get them out of their houses, destroy their houses, kill their loved ones, and then expect them to be progressive and not to be radical in some way and not to have an extremist response.
I mean, the desire for revenge is so clear.
Yeah.
And we see that amongst Jews following the Holocaust.
It's gonna be a cycle. Unfortunately, it's gonna stay a cycle. Like, maybe in 100 years, the situation here will be different. Like, maybe it will be mostly Palestinians and something else. But the situation, like, the circle is gonna continue. And I hope my generation or the one after gets to break the circle that started hundreds of years ago to, hey, can we just, have equality and freedom for everyone, empathy, sympathy, basic humanity for one another? Because when you get to know anyone, it's funny because most of the people you see on your day-to-day basis, in your workplace, in your university, is an ex-soldier and an ex-cop. Like, they have empathy, but they lose it once they put on the uniform, which is unfortunate. But I think that's the first step, is recognizing that both sides are humans and that we want to work together. We should work together to just achieve this peace. And, we have to work a lot for it, but I think anyone who comes from a Holocaust surviving family, once they understand what the Palestinian people went through, they would say, oh wow, or whatever, the Nakba Holocaust happened at the same time. They should have some sort of understanding. They should draw the similarities and say, hey, I stood up against the Holocaust. I should stand up against what's happening in Palestine. I should stand up whatever happened in Rwanda, Congo, South Africa. It's not a one place thing. Supporting the Palestinian cause isn't just supporting Palestinian liberation. Like, no one is free until everyone is free. We want liberation for everyone. And as soon as our work is done here, I'm sure we're gonna go and talk about a different country and do activism in a different country and end an occupation in a different country, It's not just this one case specifically.
I have a friend, his name is Yusuf. He's Palestinian, but he had to leave to Canada, and it's mind-blowing. I had to leave my country. Somebody went to my country, probably from Russia or from Eastern Asia, like Central Asia, I meant to say. And then I have to come to somebody else's land and be a stranger in this land. And so that another one of my friends has to go to another land and be a stranger in that land. It's just happening to a lot of people now. That's what I've noticed. This trend. This is a global trend.
Yeah. I mean, it's terrible that so many people are displaced, but it's also so important to be in the place and get to know not just people like you in that place, but the people that have been there for generations and generations, and to understand what solidarity with the people on that land looks like, and thinking about how to build that future it's not easy, but it's also the most important mission to be doing in the world, arguably.
I think it's just putting faces to the numbers. Me and Kostas talked about this like an hour or two ago, is like, you see these posts, you see these numbers, but you don't see faces. That's why I think this conflict specifically brought on much support from foreigners and other people and students, whether it be in Europe or in the US, is there were faces to these numbers, to this war. Like, you can recognize almost any infamous Palestinian reporter
from Gaza, whether it be Saleh, whether it be Hind, whether it be Bisan, and whatever. There's a lot of people. I think this one specifically is what changed from other wars, like maybe 2014 or the one before, but putting faces to the numbers was a big step in the right direction to recognize that something is going on.
Yeah. I do want to just add one little bow on the question of comparison, because I think it's really important to recognize the ways in which comparisons can open our eyes. Often people say like, oh, comparing the way the Israeli state is operating to the Nazis is disrespectful or victim blaming or historical inversion or whatever they're saying. But when I was studying the history of the Zionist movement, I came on a quote from a person named Aharon Zisling, who was the agricultural minister for the provisional government of the emerging Israeli state in 1948. He was actually from Minsk and was a Knesset member for the leftmost party in the Knesset. As he was witnessing the Nakba unfold, he said, "I couldn't sleep all night. I felt that things that were going on were hurting my soul, the soul of my family, and all of us here. Now Jews too have behaved like Nazis, and my entire being has been shaken." This was in 1948, and seeing Jews kicking people out of their homes and stuff like that. And I think it's really important to recognize that these comparisons are not new. Like, this was a person saying this in 1948, and he was in the Knesset. He was a minister in the provisional government. And I think recognizing that these things have been unfolding for generations, since as long as the state has been operating. And I was told as a kid that, like, to give up on being Jewish was to let Hitler have a posthumous victory, like a post-death win for Hitler if we give up on being Jewish. I would say it's also a victory for Hitler to have Jews create an ethno-state, which was his entire vision for the German people. And I think it's really important to see those comparisons so that we can actively break from them, especially when the Israeli state is actively committing crimes that have been going on for generations at this point.
I mean, yeah, we can remember the Havara Agreement when the German state in 1933 made it possible for Jews traveling to Palestine to take a lot of assets with them, whereas when they migrated to other places, they couldn't take anything. So in part, yes, this state is actually built by these funds also, which were possible because talking to Hitler. And now Netanyahu is talking to everyone, to Zelensky. I think he talked to Putin. I don't know if he talks to Lukashenko.
He's been inviting Jordan Bardella, the French fascist leader of the party over there.
I remember passing by the Palestinian embassy in Belarus, actually. Yeah.
Fun fact, now Likud is an observer in the same European party fraction as the Polish National Front, the Polish anti-Semitic far-right best buddies, apparently.
But adding on to what Ben said, I think the first misstep to criticizing, I guess, any injustice that's going on is comparison, because you can't compare human life and human tragedy. Like, a death is a death, unfortunately. However you put it, numbers are gonna be numbers, and there are people who died. It doesn't matter how, it just matters that there is injustice and it needs to be changed. We need to do something for that change. And I guess drawing on comparisons to the Israeli occupation ethno-state plan and the Nazi plan is not criticizing Jewishness. It's criticizing the injustice that's going on. Like, I can promise that you ask any Muslim, they don't hate Jews. Like it is in Quran to recognize Jewishness and Judaism being one of the three main religions. So we're just trying to criticize the injustice that's been going on and not the Jewishness. That's why we bring up these comparisons. You know, we pay respect to all Holocaust survivors and people who went through death. We don't want to say, oh wow, what if we did things differently in Gaza? We want to do things differently. We don't want history to repeat itself multiple times. And it's not about numbers, it's just about tragedies. You know, we don't want man-made tragedies to just keep on coming.
Well said, thank you.
On that note, thank you so much. Really been a pleasure.
Really, really appreciate you guys coming on. I think this has been such an insightful conversation, and I think it's so important for people to see and hear your life experiences, because I think it's hard for people in places like the United States to really comprehend how much nuance is really needed to see what's going on the ground and to think about what it might take to build a new peace movement on the ground. And the type of work you guys are doing is vital to making that possible for the future.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I think I would love to be back, whatever it may be, another interview podcast or whatever. Like, I'm happy to do so, and I'm happy to just raise awareness to whatever is going on, no matter what it is.
A long time coming.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I hope to talk to you soon.
Never say that you've reached the very end, when leaden skies a bitter future may portend. For sure the hour for which we yearn will yet arrive, and our marching steps will thunder we survive. For sure the hour for which we yearn will yet arrive, and our marching steps will thunder we survive. Not lead but blood inscribe this bitter song we sing. 'Tis not a caroling of birds upon the wing, but 'twas a people midst the crushing fires of hell that sang this song and fought courageous till it fell. But 'twas a people midst the crushing fires of hell that sang this song and fought courageous till it fell. Sag nicht keinmal aus, du gehst den letzten Weg, wenn himlen plejer forstern blåjet seg. Weil kommen vän og så røyska vekk og sjå. Es sveta pojkton om seg tratt mer seinen då. Weil kommen vän og så røyska vekk og sjå. Es sveta pojkton om seg tratt mer seinen då. Land bis Land von weißen Schnee. Wir kommen mit unser Bein, mit unser Weg. Und wo gefallen dieser Spritz von unser Boot? Spritzen Wettdorf, unser Wohre, unser Mut. Es wird der Morgen Sandbagel in uns dem Heim. Der Herr deckt den Wett, verschwiegen mit dem Feind. Nur euch versammeln mit die Sonne und dem Kajon. Wie ein paar Orsen ging das Lied von dort zu dort. Nur euch versammeln mit die Sonne und dem Kajon. Wie ein paar Orsen ging das Lied von dort zu dort. Das Lied mit der Blut und nicht mit Leid. Es ist nicht kein Lied von der Vogel läuft der frei. Das hat der Volk schließen alle nicht gewinnt. Das Lied gesungen mit der Ganes in die Hand. Das hat der Volk schließen alle nicht gewinnt. Das Lied gesungen mit der Ganes in die Hand. Sag nicht keinmal aus, du gehst den letzten Weg. Wenn himlen bleiben vor Sternen blåjer teg. Weil kommen vett av unser røyska vekk og sjå. Es sveta pojkton und der Trott wir seinen då. Weil kommen shore.